I had a front seat view of him, coming in on a 45-degree angle and then pulling his aircraft up, and basically watched, our propeller saw his plane in half.
Good afternoon. I want to report to the American people, and especially to the families involved, that I've just talked with Brigadier General Seelock, who earlier today met with our 24 men and women in China. The general tells me they are in good health, they suffered no injuries, and they have not been mistreated. I know this is a relief to their loved ones and to all Americans. Our crew members express their faith in America, and we have faith in them. They send their love to their families. They said they're looking forward to coming home, and we are looking forward to bringing them home. This is an unusual situation in which an American military aircraft had to make an emergency landing on Chinese soil. Our approach has been to keep this accident from becoming an international incident. We have allowed the Chinese government time to do the right thing. But now, it is time for our servicemen and women to return home. And it is time for the Chinese government to return our plane.
It's close. I agree. Go
He's very, very close.
Yeah.
He's almost probably 20 feet from our wingtip. So he's inside of our wingtip.
Everybody's doing their job, right? And that's the normal status quo for missions, right? There's not really a lot of questions or anything like that, right? It's just once you get on your mission, then everybody's just, doing what they're supposed to do. Now, obviously, once two F-82 fighter aircraft from China come out and want to take a look at you, that becomes, right, a little more exciting. They've been known to do what was called thumping, or is what the term that we used at the time, which is where they're basically trying to interrupt the airflow over the wing of, large aircraft. And when you do that, right, it causes, the aircraft basically to thump or to, lose lift and then regain it back, right? It's almost like hitting a speed bump. That's what those, or at least one of the F-82s was doing. And the third time that he was trying to, do that, I think he just timed it wrong, and he pulled his aircraft up in front of our wing too soon. And so that's when he did that, right? At the time, I was sitting in the left seat of the aircraft, and he was on the left side. So I had a front seat view of him, coming in on a 45-degree angle and then pulling his aircraft up, and basically watched, our propeller saw his plane in half, right in front of the vertical stabilizer. I just remember at that point, right, I looked over at the other pilot in disbelief, I think, for the most part. And then it was shortly after that, right, that the plane, basically went into a slow roll to almost inverted. All you see is the ocean, and you're falling out, and then all your training and emergency procedures and all those things that you went through over and over from the first time in flight school, that all that training just kicks in, and everybody starts working together as a team to get the aircraft under control. Well, yes, as far as we know. Whether you believe, what you hear, I don't, it just depends. I would assume so, but again, we don't know, kind of thing. I do know that the pilot's name, of course, was Wong Wei. He did eject in a parachute. Some of the other people saw the parachute deploy. So, whether he was lost in the ocean or found, or, I think their claim was that he did die. So. The reality is, in aviation, right, there's an emergency code that you put in the system so that they can see you and know that, hey, here's an emergency aircraft coming in. And we're sending out Mayday and announcing, right, that we have an emergency. So I know that they said that they didn't know, right, that we were coming or whatever, but they absolutely knew, right? They absolutely knew an aircraft was coming into their airspace and was headed to Hainan Island in that specific airfield. The other thing is that in our process, right, one of the things that we do as well is you want the most senior pilots in the seats when you're flying, when you're going to land an aircraft that's crippled like that. So at one point, once we got the aircraft under control, then at that point we did do a seat swap, and that's when I got out of the seat and went to because when I left, we were still talking about ditching the aircraft, not knowing whether or not for sure we would make it to Hainan Island, right? So then the other option is, hey, now you got to ditch the aircraft in the water. I did end up getting my, the parachute on, got that put on just in case we ended up deciding to bail out or something prior to that, because there was just a lot of unknowns with how that aircraft was going to continue to fly. Again, time is hard to calculate, especially during, an emergency and stuff like that. But maybe 10, 15 minutes later, it's hard to tell, but I do remember the landing gear, because you can hear when the landing gear comes down, right? So that's when I was like, okay, hey, we're definitely going to land now because the gear's down.
There are concerns about national security and a U.S. military flight crew that was forced to make an emergency landing during a surveillance flight along China's southern coast. The U.S. spy plane was equipped with sophisticated intelligence gathering technology. We begin with ABC's national security correspondent John McWethy at the Pentagon. John?
Carol, the American aircraft was intercepted by several Chinese fighter jets in international waters. Those fighter jets, one of them apparently clipped the wing of the American aircraft, severely damaging it and forcing an emergency landing in Chinese territory. On Chinese television tonight, they are saying one of their fighter jets has crashed into the ocean after the incident.
The American aircraft may not look like much, but this 4-engine propeller plane called the EP-3 Ares would be an intelligence goldmine for China if that government refuses to give it back to the U.S.
It's jam-packed with some of the most sensitive intelligence collection gadgets that the American intelligence community has.
Flying out of Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, Japan, the plane involved in last night's incident was working its way along the coast of China near the island of Hainan. Its mission, gather radar frequencies and radio traffic from China's air defense, naval, and missile installations. After the incident, the P-3 made an emergency landing on the Chinese island of Hainan.
The American pilot radioed that all 24 men and women on board were safe, but they had been ordered by the Chinese to shut down the aircraft. That was the last communication. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said the incident was, quote, entirely the responsibility of the U.S. plane because it veered unexpectedly. American officials say that is nonsense. Admiral Dennis Blair, Pacific commander, said the responsibility lies with the fast-moving Chinese jets.
Under international airspace rules, the faster, more maneuverable aircraft has the obligation to stay out of the way of the slower aircraft. Our aircraft fly routinely straight and level. It's pretty obvious as to who bumped into whom.
Once we landed and were able to get off the runway, then it was obvious that they knew we were coming, right? Because the plane was surrounded immediately, and if they didn't know, they wouldn't have had the personnel there and available and ready to do that. So that's my opinion anyway. And then it's not too long after that buses arrive, and everybody's obviously excited that we landed, everybody's safe. And then eventually we just made the decision, hey, obviously the plane's surrounded, I guess we might as well get off the plane. We came off the plane and they basically had us get on buses. I think we sat on the bus for sure over an hour. And one of the things that happened was we did lose pressurization, when the damage occurred. With that, obviously the air is very dry, and probably too, just from the adrenaline and everything, everybody was, super thirsty. So everybody was, once we landed and stopped, right? I can remember I think I chugged a Gatorade, and now I'm stuck on a bus for an hour, and it didn't appear that we were going to move anytime soon. So we had to try and, obviously we were communicating that, hey, we're going to need to use the restroom here pretty quick. It wasn't too long after that, maybe another 30 minutes or so, that they drove us somewhere to where we could get off the bus, use the restroom, and then right back on. And I think we waited a little longer and then ended up, I think, being served a meal in like a dining hall. And then from the dining hall ended up getting into some type of barracks of some sort. It wasn't too long. I think once, I was taken for to be interrogated. I think that's when there were threats, right, about, hey, if you're not going to talk, then there will be a trial later and you won't be able to talk during the trial and probably be in prison, and right, all those type of things were coming up in the interrogation sessions. And for the most part, the three pilots were being interrogated twice a day, every day while we were there. And it was just random times, right? Just middle of the night, during the day, just very random. But the three of us were interrogated pretty much twice a day, every day. Oh no, I think in this case, it was pretty similar, right? I was sitting in a chair and there were, two people behind a desk. And then one was basically the interpreter, even though, as it went on, came to realize that, the other individual sitting there speaks perfect English. But I don't know if it was training, or just the way they wanted to interrogate, but right. And then you got a light on you. At one point, I remember and how I ended up finding out that the other guy could speak perfect English is he got whatever he was saying in Chinese that he wanted the interpreter guy to ask me in English. He was not interpreting it correctly. So he got angry and basically spoke clear English to the interpreter, basically saying, "This is what I want you to ask." I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." But again, no, and I tell people all the time, right? There was no, physical harm done to me while I was there. It was just threats. Probably the first time that I got taken for interrogation was probably, right, the most difficult day because of the fact, you're by yourself, right? I'm being taken away from, we basically had a roommate where we were staying in each of the rooms. Everybody had a roommate, which was somebody else from the crew. But, when they came and got you, then you were on your own just with, and not knowing that first time what was going to happen or what was going to be said. So that was probably it. Just the unknown of being taken away and not knowing where you're being taken, first of all, right? Like all you know is that, hey, some couple guys came and got you and are leading you somewhere else. And you don't know where that is or what that's even to do, right? Whether that's to be interrogated or something else. Don't know.
All of us around this table understand diplomacy takes time. But there is a point, the longer it goes, there's a point at which our relations with China could become damaged.
Is there any more that you can do or say, sir?
Every day that goes by increases the potential that our relations with China could be damaged.
I think that this issue should have been resolved a long time ago. And the United States should apologize for this incident and should act in a positive fashion. And in other words, we would like to see a speedy settlement of this issue, but the ball is not in our court. Let me say finally that this is a very important relationship. Good relationship between us is in the interest of our two peoples and in the interest of the people of the world. And we will try our best to have improved relations with the United States. On the other hand, China is a sovereign country. We have our own dignity. So we have to safeguard our own sovereignty and dignity. And this issue has been caused not by the Chinese side, but by the American side. So we hope that the American side will adopt the right approach.
We've made it very clear we don't think an apology is in order. The plane and the crew are in China because of the accident that occurred in international airspace. We had every right to be in international airspace, and that's really not an issue here from our standpoint. We had no choice, the crew had no choice, but to land on Chinese territory at an airbase because of the damage to the aircraft. The question now is resolving the matter.
We had a military liaison from the embassy in China. General Seelock was his name, and he was great. He would get to come and see us every now and then and provide information on what was going on in the political realm, on possibly going home. And people started to get emails, so then it's kind of like, well, this is interesting. Nobody was getting those before. And then Bibles and stuff like that started to be given, those type of things. So I think that was a signal. Once we were notified, hey, you guys are going home and it'll probably be tomorrow, and hey, we're going to let you call. They had I think it was the embassy or General Sealack had like a sat phone that we were able to call home. And I've talked before, right? That's one of the most disappointing moments of that was, I'm all excited to call my wife and tell her I'm on my way home. And her answer is, I know, right? She probably knew before I knew that I was going to get to come home, right?
Both President Bush and Secretary of State Powell have expressed their sincere regret over China's missing pilot and aircraft. He said on behalf of the U.S. government that they were very sorry to the Chinese people and the family of pilot Wang Wei, and they were very sorry for the U.S. plane entering China's airspace and landing without a verbal clearance. As the U.S. government has already said very sorry to the Chinese people, the Chinese government has, out of humanitarian considerations, decided to allow the crew members to leave China after completing the necessary procedures.
It was pretty quick. Once we were notified, I feel like, I think we stayed, I think it was just one night, and then we were, it was around 10 or 11, maybe the next day. There were psychologists and stuff like military psychologists and stuff like that on the plane, just making sure everybody was okay. Obviously doctors, the leadership from the squadron was on the aircraft as well. And I tell people, hey, that was like the first time I ever got to eat a meal on China in an aircraft, right? It was like everybody had their own row for a seat. Right, it was on Continental Airlines, and so it was, I do remember that, like, wow, I got my own row, they served us a meal, and I had real China to eat off of a meal on an aircraft, on a commercial airline. To say that that's my memory, right, I think once we got on that plane and once it lifted off, obviously everybody cheered and was excited, and then it was like, hey, we're on our way home, this is great. President Bush, GW, was taller than I thought. He's probably 6'2" or 6'3", I think. So he was definitely, you don't really notice that on TV. So that was the first thing. But then he was very, and I remember that, we're in the Oval Office and, one of the air crewmen, asks the president, hey, can we sit in your chair behind the desk, right? And you have the Secret Service folks in there, and you see the Secret Service guys just like, and the president's like, absolutely, right? So definitely just down to earth individual who was very welcoming, and it was a great experience. And for him to like, when the Secret Service guys are like, no, shaking their head, telling him like, no, we don't want them sitting in your chair. And he's like, absolutely. So everybody rotated through, right? Sat in the president's chair behind the desk in the Oval Office. But yeah, pretty cool. Later on, as we're back in the States and having to go to various events, we were at a bar and grill after a day and the air crew. We were all there, and I remember, one of the air crewmen came up to me because we had, I had prayed with everybody, once we landed and we had that opportunity, just, obviously for President and everything to get us home as soon as possible and all those things. And so we had, we pretty much prayed before every meal, on a daily basis while we were there. And this young gentleman came up to me and he was saying, hey, I was an atheist and a non-believer. And I want to let you know that the night before, we got the news that we were going to be released was the first time I prayed in my life. And then he just smiled. He said, and had I known all it took was for me to pray, I would have done it a lot sooner.